There's something about the natural flow of conversation when it's clearly not this heavily scripted, blessed by marketing and legal, gone through all the stages of PR. It's just like, no, we're two human beings talking. And this is like why people go to conferences, or at least a lot of the people I know go to conferences. It's to have that same sort of natural interaction, the hallway track. Like you're listening in on a hallway track conversation, basically. And I
Yep.
like that format.
Please join me in welcoming founder of Ned in the Cloud and technical educator, Ned Bellavance, to the show. Ned, thanks for joining me.
Hey, John, thanks for having me. I'm excited to be here or be over Zoom with you, as it were.
We are technically here in virtual presence.
We are. And we're also not that far from each other in a physical proximity way. I mean, we're not in the same room, but we're in the same state. So that's a good start.
We're not in the same room yet. Stay tuned, folks, because we're going to be doing some live podcasting, live streaming coming up in the future. We've already acquired Ned for a short period of time doing that and locked him down.
Yes.
Don't worry. We'll get rolling on it. So, Ned, let's talk a little bit of backstory about you and yourself. Actually, how we came to get introduced. We were at the New York Summit together, and a good friend introduced us. And I'm like, you look familiar to me. I can't place my finger on it.
That was one of the stranger experiences because the AWS New York Summit was the biggest event I had been to since COVID started, since the pandemic. So I was feeling a little anxious about being around that many people. Kept my mask on for certain portions of it, especially when walking the bigger expo floor. But it was fantastic to finally meet a whole bunch of people face to face and then have these natural meetups with people that I didn't know, but that knew someone I knew. And that was the case with you. Is we're just like, hey, you also look familiar, and I feel like we got some stuff to talk about. And here we are.
In fact, we had a lot of stuff to talk about. We probably ended up talking, it was like 30, 45 minutes. Time flew by. We also I met another colleague or whatever, Michael Levan, and I was just on a live stream with him. So it's weird how these natural progressions happen when you're in that face-to-face interaction that you can't get over Zoom or virtual.
And I'm very excited that conferences are back. And leaving aside any anxiety I might have over large crowds, I'm excited to see people in person and have that natural interaction and just the surprise and spontaneous things that can happen when you're not in this rigidly scheduled Zoom type environment.
So Ned, you have a number of things going on as a technical educator, technical trainer. You have Ned in the Cloud, Day 2 Cloud. Let's dive into a couple of those.
Sure.
Is it Ned in the Cloud first or Day 2 Cloud? What came first, and how'd you come up with things?
Ned in the Cloud came first. That was when I was ready to launch my own blog. I needed a name, and I kicked around, I don't know, 30, 40 names. I had them all on a list in OneNote, and I was waffling between two or three, and I said them to my wife, and she's like, well, Ned in the Cloud, obviously. How could you go with anything else? And I was like, but my name's in it. What if I want to bring other people? She's no. That's the name. Just go with it. So it started as my own blog because I've been doing a lot of blogging for the consulting group I was working for. And it became clear to me that, there may come a day that I'm not working for that consulting group. And hey, wouldn't it be nice if I had my own thing that I owned of all the stuff that I've written, of all the content that I've generated, to point to as almost like a resume to people, but also to share the knowledge and the experience that I gained from being a consultant. Because I'm sure you know this, John, when you work in consulting, everything's sped up about 5 times faster than it is when you're working in a typical job.
Yeah. So going off the name first, I had the same feeling, the same functionality where I thought of various names. Actually, I had various names. And do you know the pain in the butt to change those everywhere socially and to make sure that SEO kind of gets the new name versus the old name? So good choice for Ned in the Cloud because it works. That's why I went with my name now, because you can't go wrong, I guess.
Yeah, and it's easy to remember. That's the two big things is it's already established and it's easy to remember and it sticks in people's heads. So that was all very important stuff to me when I was picking the name. And then when it came time to go off on my own, which is what I did after working for that consulting company about 3 years ago, I decided to go independent and just do this content creation and training and education thing full time. I toyed with the idea of establishing an LLC under another name. Same concerns, right? What if I want to bring other people in? And what if I want to do this and that? And once again, my wife, the voice of reason, was like, no, people know Ned in the Cloud. Just make that the company name. And if you need to bring other people in, like, that's fine. You can always do a doing business as something else. But, you already have this established name. Just stick with it. And I was like, wow, why? That is why I married you, because you are the voice of reason here.
I feel the same way with using my name. And then what I did is I ultimately created Myer Media. And
Mhm.
whoever wants to join underneath it, you think of all the companies that are out there that are name brand companies, they're somebody's name, like Louis Vuitton. Everybody works under, you know what I mean? You work under that. So what's wrong with Ned in the Cloud, right? You can have people who work right underneath Ned in the Cloud.
Exactly. Think about all the law firms that are out there. They're all using their own names
Yep.
as kind of a vanity thing too. But yeah. So yeah, establishing my own brand and then my own company happened about 3 years ago. And right around that same time, I was approached by Ethan Banks of Packet Pushers to start a cloud-focused podcast for their group of their family of the Packet Pushers podcasts. And I said, yeah, that sounds really good. I'd been doing a podcast for the consulting company that I was working for. And it was just a natural extension to go, well, I'm not going to be doing that anymore once I leave, one would think. So instead, why don't I start a new podcast and stick with the cloud theme and the cloud focus and call it Day Two Cloud? And the thought process behind the naming for that was you have a lot of products and architectures and whatnot that talk about the greenfield cloud deployment, the day one consideration. But I wanted to dig into sort of what's day two look like with operating the cloud, maintaining it, the things that crop up that you might not have thought of during the initial planning phase, but are certainly going to come around and smack you in the face. And cloud is constantly evolving and changing, so the things that you thought you knew, the architecture that made the most sense last year, is not the one that makes the most sense this year. So having discussions like that, and then it's kind of branched out into, we've had some good career discussions where we're just talking about, like, if you wanted to be a developer advocate or you wanted to be a product manager or something like that, what does that look like? If you want to move into management or a leadership position, what does that look like? And we talk to people who have made that transition and what that looks like. So if you're a cloud architect today, but you want to be uh, the head of the cloud department with a managerial title, what does that look like? And should you even do it? Because sometimes staying technical is the thing that you actually want to do.
So day two cloud has really evolved not only to day two type operations or things that might have once made sense, now no longer really make sense, to more of still staying technical, but bringing out some of those technical careers, those things that you want to do. How do you work this? How do you do that? But you stayed within the technical community.
Absolutely. So the folks who tend to listen to the podcast are generally systems engineers, cloud architects, someone in a DevOps role. But we do have a smattering of folks who are more on the executive side of the house, especially in the startup world, because those people also tend to be very hands-on still. So for them, it sort of bridges that gap between hands-on and the leadership functionality. And I think that's a sweet spot for me. That's kind of where I want to hang out and the people I want to interact with. So that's who it attracts, and that's who we have as guests.
I think it's nice to have a nice mixture of guests from not only the C-suite, but down to like the practitioners, of folks who are hands-on. Because as you indicated, those who are in startups tend to have multiple hats and multiple roles as they're getting the company off. So you need those folks on there. Let's talk about the technical educator part of your career, because I know you're well known in the Terraform community.
Yeah, I have built a bit of a name for myself with Terraform. So I was introduced to Terraform via a blog post by Scott Lowe. He used to be at VMware, and then he's moved around a few times. I think he's at Kong now, but he wrote about Terraform back in 2017. Might even been 2016. It was right around that time frame, and it hit me at just the right moment because in my consulting career, I had had a couple cloud projects come across my plate where I was deploying things in Azure or AWS. And I just wrapped a project where I'd written thousands of lines of cloud formation for deploying this healthcare application in AWS. And it was painful. This is pre-YAML. So this was all JSON. This was all handcrafted. And I saw Terraform and I was like, oh, okay. This immediately makes sense to me. And it is so much easier to read and edit and maintain. This really appeals to me. And around the same time, I had been at an expo and struck up a conversation with the folks at Pluralsight, just chatting with them, talking about what they do. And I thought to myself, I feel like I could make a course around Terraform. And Pluralsight at the time had no courses on Terraform. And so I said, hey, why don't I do a getting started course for you folks? And they accepted. And that in 2017, I published my very first course at Pluralsight, getting started with Terraform. And since then, I've published 25, 26 additional courses on the platform, spanning all kinds of different things, including AWS, Azure, HashiCorp products. I think that's about it right now. But who knows where the future will take me.
What's your number one course on Pluralsight, and how is it doing, man? Curious.
Well, I can't share exact numbers, I think, but
Yeah.
I can tell you that the Getting Started Terraform course, which I've refreshed twice completely, like full overhauls twice since that 2017 version, that remains my most popular course. And it's not terribly surprising. Getting started courses tend to be the most popular because that's the 101. That's where everybody starts. And for some folks, that's enough. Okay, I got the ball rolling. You've got enough information to go do your own thing. You don't need to dive any deeper. Though I do have other courses that dive deeper into this specific clouds or just Terraform concepts in general. But yeah, the Getting Started continues to be my number one, and it is consistently in the top 50 courses in the entire Pluralsight catalog, which is very nice to me. I hit a home run on the very first swing, and that was just absolute luck. I was the right place, right time, right technology.
You don't have to worry about doing any better, but I'm sure you strive to continue to get to those top 50. How did you come up with the content for this getting started? I want to know like the methodology of what you created. How did you break it down? Was it really long in some of the lessons? I mean, dive into it a little bit for me.
Yeah, so curriculum design at the time was a brand new concept to me. I'd never really done it before, but I'd taken a lot of technical trainings prior to that, sat a lot of courses to learn about Microsoft Exchange or VMware or whatever other technology it was. So I had an idea for how trainings should flow. And I took this concept from a Red Hat training that I took, which was you want relatively short pieces of lecture or presentation followed by a demonstration, followed by having someone do some hands-on work. So that was sort of my guiding principle designing the course was I want to have a hands-on component. And at the time, there was no way to provide labs through the Pluralsight platform. So it was, I had these exercise files that I'd like you to do. And so I will have some lecture, a little bit of demo, and then here, go do the exercise, pause the video, whatever, and come back to it. And then it was just like, the other big thing that Pluralsight pushed, and they gave me a lot of information about course design and the way that they think about it, which helped me think more clearly about it. They pushed the idea of having a story which unifies the course. So put it into a real world context, a real world situation. How could you build up the skills in a natural progression so the person really feels like they're moving through a real world scenario where they're building out something as opposed to just rote learning from the book. So I developed the most recent version of the course. The core concept is that you have been brought into a project to work with Terraform, and someone's basically handed you this Terraform configuration they found online. And you need to take that configuration and make it way better because everything's hard coded, everything's static. It's not great, but it's the starting point. And the progression of the course is learning about the different things in Terraform that allow you to make that configuration more dynamic, to support multiple environments, to take variables as input. And by the end, you have this real robust configuration but it's a natural learning process of each component as you make that configuration better.
I have a spitball idea for like you're getting started. You could have done like your 1,000 lines of code in CloudFormation and JSON, then Azure, and then, well, guess what, folks? We're going to narrow this down to like 50 lines. Here's what you do in Hell in Terraform. And they're like, oh my God, I can't believe you made me type all that content.
Yeah. I mean, to be honest, that environment that I deployed using CloudFormation, that was thousands of lines. I never converted that over to Terraform, but I would bet if I did, I could get it down to,
Now, for a quick interruption, a huge shout out to our friends at Veeam for sponsoring this episode. Veeam Backup for AWS can easily protect all of your Amazon EC2 RDS and VPC data. Wait a second, they can protect my VPC data too? Yep, that's right. Simplify AWS backup and recovery while ensuring security and compliance. All right, now back to our episode.
I never converted that over to Terraform, but I would bet if I did, I could get it down to, 100 to 200 lines worth of code in Terraform to deploy out the exact same architecture.
Now, you have a number of courses on Pluralsight. Terraform is your best and most performing one, but do you have a favorite course besides that one that's performing great? That home run hit is probably one of your favorites. So we have to slide that aside because that's obvious.
Yeah, I think the other course that I really, really enjoyed creating is the AWS Networking Deep Dive course. And that's in line with their certification that's specifically around advanced networking. So they have a specialty certification. And so I developed the course around the objectives for that certification. But I really just had a lot of fun digging into the networking of AWS because I knew a decent amount, right? But I didn't know the full depth and breadth of what you could do in a VPC, how everything connected together. And so what's funny is you come with this assumption when you're a learner that the person teaching you knows everything, right? They're all knowing, all seeing. They are a deep, deep expert in everything that they're teaching you. And ideally, they do know what they're talking about, right? You don't want someone who's just like staying one paragraph ahead of you, because then if you have a question, they have no answer if it's not in the textbook, right? But for anybody who's ever taught something or developed a course, you learn that subject matter much, much more deeply than you would if you were just a practitioner, because having to develop it and explain it to somebody else forces you to think about it in that teachable way. And that requires you to take a closer examination about your assumptions of what you think you know about a product versus how it actually works.
I'll tell you about the AWS networking exam in a second because I had some hard learnings. I failed my exam first going into it. I took it at an SKO thing. But how much does real world experience come into play when you're making a course?
It's definitely a significant component. Another good example is I'm in the process of redoing the Azure Virtual Desktop learning path that's on Pluralsight. So it was originally done by Greg Shields, and now I'm redoing the all 6 courses that are in the learning path. And I don't have real world experience running Azure Virtual Desktop day to day. But what I do have is 5 years of experience running various VDI, well, probably more than 5 years of experience running various VDI products, including remote desktop services upon which AVD is based. So having that real world experience and having had go through the design process for VDI, speccing out hardware, dealing with users, dealing with user profiles, which is just like the only thing that's worse than user profiles in VDI is printers.
Because they don't follow you, right? Or they never work.
They never install right. It's the wrong drivers. It's a nightmare. So having gone through that before, even though it's a new product, I have all that real world knowledge to fall back on, and I can kind of see where the pitfalls are going to be for the person who's learning. And that helps me just put up signposts and go, hey, pay attention to this part because this part's super important. Whereas this is on the exam, you probably need to know it, but in real life, that's not the thing that you're going to need to focus on as much. So I think it's the combination. Being an effective educator is a combination of real world experience, the lived experience of having done the stuff, but also just the the skills that you build up being able to design effective presentations and scenarios and curriculum that's going to actually enable someone to learn.
Do you find it difficult to learn or to understand both Azure, AWS, or various other technologies? Can you dive deep on both? Do you stay at a high level, or you really have to like, all right, I'm shutting down my brain this week on AWS and I'm kicking it on for Azure. We don't talk it, it doesn't exist. So you can actually create content. I mean, I find it difficult talking two different clouds sometimes.
Two? What's this two stuff?
Hey, well, there are only two in my opinion. We will not touch on the third one because I don't think they like me.
The third rail? Ah,
Yeah.
at Oracle Cloud Infrastructure, obviously, right? So it's
Let's
funny. I I have worked on all three major US clouds, let's say, because I haven't worked on Ali Cloud at all, but I know that's pretty big in certain portions of the world. And it really does, it's a mental shift every time I move from one project to another. So I really do kind of like what you said. I have to like just have this compartment in my brain. This is your AWS knowledge. And when it's time to engage that, I shut down the Azure and maybe the GCP stuff that gets, squirreled away somewhere in, deep storage, glacier storage.
Glacier. I was just about to say Glacier because you'll recover it in a while.
I'll get it back in a while. And
Yeah.
this is just, we're in AWS mode right now. And then when the next thing I have to work on is Azure, then, everything gets packed away for AWS for a little bit. And I have to kind of reboot everything in from Azure. And of course, in the time that I was working on AWS, 300 new things have been released in Azure and GCP. So the service that I knew and was comfortable with has probably changed slightly since I last interacted with it. So I have to, maybe catch up on the release notes a little bit or just play around in the portal a little bit to see what's new, what's different about the product before I start, teaching it or actually deploying something for somebody.
Real quick on the networking exam, there was a question on it, and I can share it because I remember it. And I asked the guy who developed the exam, and I was like, "Hey, listen," I ran into him during our lunch at our SKO, and it's like, "Buddy, I have a question. On the exam, it said that where did the EIP live for the EC2 instance?" And I was like, "Well, obviously on the instance because I can query the metadata and pull up and." He goes, "No, it lives on the internet gateway. That's where it's actually at. That's how it gets out." And I'm like, "Oh yeah, that makes sense." Yeah, I know I failed that question. I had a tough time on just that question alone. It was a learning curve for it, but I understand.
Yeah, networking in AWS and networking in any of the clouds is kind of weird, right? Because it's all software defined.
Hmm.
That's a bit of a mental shift from what you may have had in an on-premises network, where in that example, where something has a public IP address, like a server in your server farm has a public IP address, that would you would put that on the NIC configuration,
Yep.
that public IP address, and then you'd have the routing being handled probably by your firewall. But that's not how it works in AWS because everything's software defined. So they just allocate the elastic IPs at the internet gateway and then make that association between the internet gateway, that IP address, and where it's which network interface it's attached to on the EC2 instance. So it's all magic, right? Like it's not actually associated anywhere.
Yeah, all managed behind the scenes. Ned, how do you come up with the content you create? Is it something that you say or suggest for Pluralsight? You know what? This is the next one, or do they come and approach you? What do you think? What about this?
It's a bit of a combination. So they do have a curriculum or a catalog of things that they would like developed, and sometimes they will publish opportunities and I'll go and go, yeah, that one I know enough about and I feel comfortable developing a course for it. Otherwise, sometimes it's just me raising my hand going, there's this new thing that came out, I'd like to do a course on it, and I usually get the blessing pretty quickly, like, yep, go for it, go make that course. They have to do the calculation on their side. Does it make sense to put it in the time and effort and the platform space for a particular course? So I have to make, at least a somewhat compelling argument to do that. But I don't just create stuff for Pluralsight. So I've gone outside of that walled garden. And I also have a YouTube channel where I just create my own content, mostly around Terraform and HashiCorp Vault. though I've been known to touch on some other technologies. And a lot of those are just something new came out and I want to explore it a little bit. So I'll do some exploration and I'll write something up about it and then I'll shoot a video about it. Or something that I banged my head on real hard because it was confusing or the documentation wasn't clear. Hey, I'm going to put together a quick video that explains what's really going on behind the scenes. And I know you prefer to do the shorter 2 to 3 minute videos, and a lot of mine are 10, 15, sometimes 20 minutes long. I do put chapters in. So if you just want to jump straight to the demo and see it in action, you can do that. I keep everything in a repository on GitHub. So if you just want to look at the demo files, you can do that. If you want to know what's happening behind the scenes, if that's relevant to you and that's interesting, then you can watch that portion of the video where I break down. So this is what you see, but this is what's actually happening behind the scenes with Terraform or Vault or with the cloud that it's interacting with. And sometimes that's a key component to understanding the weird behavior that you'll see when you're using Terraform or Vault or really anything. Is like, you think you know what it's doing, but it's actually doing something slightly different. And when you push it to its breaking point, that gets exposed because it's a leaky abstraction sometimes.
Speaking of content creating, do you find, and you mentioned you put it onto GitHub, do you find the value of putting the videos and the files on there? Are people pulling them down and looking at them a lot? Because I'm curious as a content creator if it's another platform that I need to start pushing to.
Well, so the stuff that I have on GitHub, I have a repository called Terraform Tuesdays, and that is all the code examples of what I'm doing in the demos for the videos. So it's not the actual videos
Yeah,
themselves. It's just the exercise files, but it's something where I know people are going to want to follow along and
gotcha.
to help them follow along. And also just as a reference for myself, when I need to do something outside of, the YouTube video, it's like, oh, I really need, some code that does X. Well, I know I have it all in this one repository here. So I just have to find the presentation that included it and then extract it out and use it. So it's got 245 stars on GitHub. I mean, it's not gangbusters, right? But I know people are looking at it, and part of it, I'm just maintaining it for myself.
I'm not sure I'm going to be pushing to GitHub anytime soon. I do write some code, but not enough to really see the value for me to actually get it out. I don't even think anybody's going to look at it or I'm going to get any stars right now. I might get some thumbs down. Speaking of your content creating, let's jump into that. Ned, how do you create your content? What kind of setup do you have that you're creating this awesome content, and how and who is doing the editing to get it out there so quick?
Oh, geez. So that's a more complicated question than it might initially seem. So, I mean, if we're just talking straight up gear, right? Um, I got the Elgato key lights for my lighting situation. I've got the Shure SM7B microphone going into a Rodecaster Pro. That's doing all of the additional preamp that's necessary. And I forget exactly which camera I have, but it's a Panasonic of some kind
It
that I've got,
works.
and it is just specifically for that purpose. I never take it off the stand, basically. So that's like my basic setup, right? But in terms of editing, it really depends on the platform. So for Day 2 Cloud, we have a dedicated team of editors, like freelance editors, that we send the audio files to. They clean it up, fix all the flubs, make sure all the levels are good, and send it back. So that's all taken care of for me. When it comes to the YouTube videos, that's all edited by me. I load it up into a video editing program, and I don't do a lot of editing. I've learned to do things while recording that make it easier for me to edit after the fact. Like, I'm not trying to edit out every flub. I'm not trying to edit out every and that comes across. It's more, okay, I really screwed up this part. I'm going to go back to the beginning and just redo this whole portion. And I have little transitions that I use so that when I finish one section, I know it's good. That I know if I have to restart it all, I can just go back to where I was at the beginning of that section and go from there. So I've done some things for myself to make the editing a little bit easier. But yeah, all that editing is done by me. And then for Pluralsight, I have an editor that I pay to edit the courses for that, and she cleans up all my stammers and stutters and whatnot in the audio, and also puts all the call outs into the video to direct people where to look in the video and whatnot. So she does a great job of that, and that I'm happy to ship that off to her. Uh, Maybe someday I'll do the same thing in my YouTube videos, but I don't know.
I'm hoping one day I do all mine there. I do have like a video editor, but I understand where you're coming from. It takes time and effort to do your personal ones, let alone the ones that you put out there for like Pluralsight or a professional. Now, I know you didn't call out the video editing software that you're using, but do you have templates in there? Is there a standard here? Are you running like a high class software that you get it all done? Because I know we talked about this offline. I'm like,
And
wait, that's all you do? Why am I putting in so much effort into this? So
uh, to be honest, when I started doing work with Pluralsight, their standard software that they recommended was Camtasia because it's relatively easy to learn. For the newbie, it's not a really steep learning curve, so you can get onboarded and start using it no problem, especially to record and edit. I've thought about trying to learn some more difficult software that has more bells and whistles, but so far I haven't hit the limit where Camtasia can't do the thing that I want it to do. And so I just keep using the thing I know how to use because I'm fast with it, right? And I've built up some things in the library inside of Camtasia, like my transitions and my lower thirds and all that. So it's all just a matter of dragging and dropping that into the video when I need that component. And so, yeah, I mean, I can edit things in a pretty speedy fashion, but I haven't gone full overboard with a dedicated editing control ball and the buttons and all that jazz. Like I'm not there. And if it ever gets to that point, that I should really be hiring somebody to do that. That's not the best use of my time.
I think you were calling out the device on my desk. I use two software. I have to use one to record and one to edit because the one that I do use to edit doesn't record, but the one
Right.
that I record, I can use to edit. Go figure. But I wanted to up my game a little bit onto my videos and transitions, though I don't want to do this long term either. I mean, I do enjoy it. You know, that's really what kind of gets the crowd going, but it does take a while to do. Do you, oh, go ahead.
There is a tremendous benefit behind editing yourself. And I know anybody who's ever created a podcast or a video or whatever usually finds it very painful to listen to themselves or watch themselves initially. And you do, for those who are just getting started, I will comfort you and say you grow used to it. You do grow numb to the fact that you're staring at yourself or listening to yourself. And it's just, you become a little more robotic about it. So if that's the thing that drives you crazy, you'll get used to it. But beyond that, watching yourself and also listening to yourself gives you the opportunity to improve. You see where you might be struggling with filler words. And different people have different filler words. My worst ones are so. I use so like way too often. And when I try to remove it, I end up using another filler word like now or let's or something like that. So it's impossible to get away from them. It's more just like being aware of how you use them and maybe trying to tone it down a little bit. You learn to kind of pause speaking instead of saying and a lot. You learn how to talk to the camera in a friendly way and maintain sort of a friendly like there's just you learn so much about your presentation skills while you're doing the editing. I would say for anybody, when you're getting started, edit your own stuff for at least the first 6 months. After that, sure, farm it out to somebody else. But that first 6 months, it's going to be this feedback loop. We think about DevOps, we think about feedback loops, we think about, how do I improve? How do I iterate? How do I get better? If you're not seeing yourself, if you're not seeing the results of the recording and what's required to edit and improve it, then it's going to be difficult for you to improve as a presenter or a creator.
I think that's the best advice I've ever heard for creating your own content is to do your own editing right away. I learned it the hard way, obviously, and I'm right there with you. I could not stand the sound of my voice. You're like, do I really sound like that? But I think that's really key. The pauses. Now, I've gotten a lot better at the pauses where you don't want to use those filler words. Sometimes you start having a brain flub and you're like, you need something to kind of fill it in. And the power of the pause allows your brain to catch up so you can talk about it. There are a number of other things where you continuously ask a question. And I still have this sometimes where I will ask you a question, add on to that question, and then repeat that question before you get a chance to answer that question. So I've gotten a lot better at it where I will pause afterwards. And if I never get to the second part of that question, no big deal, because the conversation has taken a natural twist to it and we're on to something else.
Mm-hmm. That's another thing is, and this is more of a podcasting thing and less of a creating videos. When you're interacting with another human being, it's going to be unpredictable, and you have to embrace that unpredictability and move forward with it. So
Yep.
you may have everything scripted out to a T. And so I'll tell you a little anecdote of when I was still creating podcasts for the consulting group. We had some internal folks that wanted to be on the podcast. They'd been developing this really cool CI/CD project, and they'd implemented Team City and Octopus Deploy, and they were just super jazzed about what they put together. And I was like, this is really cool. You should come on and talk about it. And so one of them showed up, and he played bass in a band. He was used to being on stage. He just rocked up with a couple notes, scribbled down on a piece of paper, good to go. The other guy came in and he had typed out notes with everything he wanted to say verbatim in the notes. And that's how he presented during the podcast. He just read the notes and hold on, let me turn the page. And so then we added Team City and it was awful. And I really it took me a while to just prime away from the notes. And that was a beast to edit too. But I think what's important, the lesson to take away from there is don't overscript, don't overthink it, and let things flow naturally. It's going to feel more natural to the audience, and it's just going to feel better to you once you get used to it. So I guess if I was a surfer, I would make a surfing analogy, but I'm not. So
I'll just say, just do it.
yeah.
That works with everything you're saying. How many times during your recording process do you A, re-record, or B, realize, and when I say re-record, you scrap it or you start the recording over, or B, you just go pause, make a clap that you indicate that where you're at within the session, and then just repeat that?
When it comes, again, it depends on the format, right? If I'm doing a podcast with somebody else, generally it's more on them. I usually feel comfortable with whatever I'm saying, and I've spent many, many hours in front of a microphone. So even if I mispronounce something and repeat it, I don't need that edited out. I'm a fallible human. That's fine. But I can tell when somebody else doesn't feel good about a response, and I want them to feel free to pause things and I re-ask the question, or just have them count themselves back in and start at the beginning of their answer. And then we have an editor who snips it all out and makes it perfect. And that makes me happy because I don't have to do it. Now, when I'm creating content for my Pluralsight courses and for other similar avenues, I actually have this little clicker, and it's a dog training clicker. But what I do is when I flub something, I click like that, and that creates this big spike in the waveform. And then when I'm doing my editing, I can see where those spikes are. And if I see some spikes, I'm like, all right, that's where I screwed up. Those are the spikes letting me know I screw up. And that's the good take. And I can just snip it out without even listening to it. So it's a nice visual cue for an audio medium.
That's nice. I do a clap or a long pause because I'll look at the audio wave and I'll be like, wow, there's a long pause there. Okay. And as soon as I start listening to it, okay, I got to clip that out. There have been times that if it's a short video, whatever it may be, that I will actually scrap it and re-record. I've actually been known to do a re-record maybe 4 or 5 times, and the naturalness comes out. You really want to get certain keywords out there, whether it's like a paid type thing where you have to follow somewhere of a script, somewhere of a verbiage, but you don't want it to come across like, oh yeah, folks, you want to go buy this. You just want to talk natural. And I've been there on all occasions. So it's nice to know I'm not the only one that does that. My question, do you leave flubs in there for Pluralsight for the naturalness to make sure that you're vulnerable, so as a human, or do you try to clear them all out or as best as possible?
See, they have standards. So I do have to adhere to some of those standards,
Yep.
but I don't mind leaving in mistakes. when I say mistakes, I don't necessarily mean verbal flubs where I mispronounce something. I want to edit that out because I
Yeah.
want the information being conveyed to be technically accurate. But if I'm doing something in a demo and it breaks or it screws up, I would rather show the part where it breaks or screws up because as technologists, we know when you go out in the real world with the stuff you just learned in the classroom, things are going to break in new and novel and frustrating ways. So, A, knowing that the instructor has to deal with the same pain and sort of seeing their troubleshooting process is huge. And it also just makes you feel more comfortable about the fact that not everything you're doing is going to be perfect either. So, I do like to leave some of those mistakes in. I don't intentionally make those mistakes, but they're just going to happen. And when they do, I want to leave them in to make the learner a little more comfortable. I've already established I know what I'm talking about. So now I just want to establish that I'm also a human being that makes mistakes. And sometimes software doesn't work the way you expect it.
Demos typically don't work the way you expect them.
No, they don't. When it goes really smoothly, when everything goes right, I feel like something went wrong.
When everything goes right, it's usually the pre-work right before the demo. You do a demo before you get the live audience. Yep, it all looks good. Then you do a demo, and then it doesn't work.
Because you forgot to tear down the one thing that gets redeployed, but it throws an error. And then you're like, scrambling because I screwed it all. Yeah, it
Yep.
certainly happened to me.
So now, before we wrap things up, I want to understand, how do you juggle all this content that you're creating, from podcasts to Pluralsight to the stuff that you put on your website? I mean, it seems like a lot of work.
Yeah, it is. You're not wrong. I think
Well, thanks for joining the show. That was like the answer for that.
it is, John. It is.
Uh,
And I'm out. No,
mic drop.
love
See ya.
I would love to say that I am deep into Todoist, or I have everything in Asana, or I have this really complicated or even not so complicated organizational structure that I follow for all of my projects. And I have tried. I've tried everything. I've tried Trello boards. I've tried checklists in OneNote. I have tried writing stuff down on paper. I have tried just about every organizational system that I know of. And I stick with each of them for about 2 or 3 weeks and then I stop. And it's just because that's not how my brain wants to work. So I have yet to find a system that's perfect for me. A lot of it is just planning it out in my brain and blocking out time in my calendar and then sticking to that as best I can. But I still scramble. I still run up against deadlines and go, oh crap, I have to have that course finished in a week. And I haven't even recorded the first module. So I better get on that, you know? And generally speaking, I make sure the content is good. So even if it's a little behind, people don't mind. But I do try to deliver everything on time and not overcommit all the time.
Ned, the more and more that I learn about you, we are so much alike. Oh my God. From Zoom to Google Docs to now trying different methods to tracking. I swear, 2 to 3 weeks might be a little less than me. Maybe I do 3 weeks on a new thing. I'm like, oh yeah, I got this notebook. I'm gonna write it all down. And I tend to write things and sometimes don't go back and look at them. So like, oh, I forgot about it, or a task.
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah, I got a whole checklist of things to my left right here of tasks that I should be working on, but I haven't added anything today and I haven't checked anything off. And I'm like, uh-oh, am I slipping again? So I'm gonna try to stick with this for another couple weeks before I give up and reboot on something else. We'll see whatever that thing is.
You haven't got it done because this is the second podcast you and I are on today. So
Yeah, right.
am I on that list? John, podcast check.
The show notes were, and actually
Oh,
has a check mark next to it. I did it. I
you
did that
did
one.
do something. See, that's great. You got it all done. No worries about that. So, Ned, real quick, some advice you give others who want to not only start out creating content for courses or creating content for YouTube, like videos or how-tos or demos. What advice would you give folks?
I mean, the two biggest pieces of advice I would give. Number one, you have to do it about something you're passionate about. If you don't care that much about it, people are going to know. And your content's not going to be engaging. So whether that's a point of frustration, like you were trying to do something and it just didn't work the way you expected, and you want to share that with the world, that is perfect. You're feeling passionate. Maybe you're angry about it. That's going to make for a great blog post or a video. The other thing I would say is don't overcomplicate it. I just talked about all these systems that I try to put in place for things. And the problem with all those systems, they are complex and they take maintenance, which is where I always fall down. So make things simple, don't overcomplicate it, and don't think you have to have a really involved setup initially for shooting videos or writing content. Just do something. It's going to be terrible the first few times. I'm sure you've got some stuff on your YouTube channel, and I know I do from when I first started that makes me cringe, but you get better and you only get better with practice. So keep it simple, practice a lot, and go with your passion.
I thought for there you were saw my TikTok today, or we were more alike than I thought, because I literally said the 3 secrets to podcast success. And one was pick a topic you're passionate about. That was my number 1. 2, record and post it. And number 3 was grind it out. Like if you feel that it's getting tough and you get tired, keep doing it and keep doing it some more. So when you first started off with that first one, I'm like, oh my God, we are definitely really alike.
I think what that reflects is not so much that you and I are very alike, although we are. I think what it really reflects is the things that lead to success are going to be common across a lot of people. So if you ask a bunch of creators this question, you're probably going to get some variety of those 3 points, because I think those really are some of the keys to success.
I agree with you. Ned, thank you so much for joining the show. I had a lot of fun. Great conversation all around.
Yeah, absolute pleasure, John. Thanks for having me on.
All right, everybody. Founder of Ned in the Cloud and technical educator, Ned Bellavance. I've been your host, John Myer. Don't forget to hit that like, subscribe, and notify, because guess what, folks? As always, we're out of here.